Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's basketball betting podcast presented by FanDuel. We are back from the WNBA All-Star break. I'm your host, Maria Marino, joined by Action Network writer Jim Turvey at TurveyBets on Twitter and the Action app. Jim, it's good to see you again. The last time I saw you was at our Action Network Content Summit in New York City last week. We did an impromptu video for social media and both of your picks hit. So it was a great day.
Yeah, that was super fun. It was good to get kind of mix it up, do the video side in the room on the go between summit meetings and yeah, they both hit. So that was, yeah, like you said, even better. It was fun to do anyways, but when they're winners, you can't do better than that. So that was fun.
And very impressive of you as we switched up the format. We didn't do, the full length podcast, but still got some great picks out there. So well done. But then we had the All-Star game. It was certainly an exciting weekend for the W. You had Sabrina Ionescu with the record-breaking performance in the three-point contest for both NBA and WNBA. It was truly a spectacle. And then in the All-Star game, Jewel Lloyd, the MVP, with also a record 31 points. But we are back in action with two games on the slate on Tuesday. So let's get into those and we'll get your picks. And we're going to start with the Lynx facing the Dream. Dream are favored by 4.5. That opened at -3.5. That's at 7 Eastern on NBA TV. So the Lynx lost their last two coming in. They had a 5-game win streak before that, but all against non-playoff teams. Dream, meanwhile, are on a 6-game win streak, and Ryan Howard in that span averaging 22.6 points per game. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we're gonna, we'll get to both games eventually, but I think this is a night for favorites, and the Atlanta Dream are in part favorites because they're home. Like you said, it opened up at 3.5, which kind of implies that the books see them as a very small favorite over the Lynx. I see them as a much bigger favorite. I have this number out 7.5, almost 8. This Atlanta team, I think part of what the number has baked in here is that they have shown the ability to not be, at the top of their game at times this season. They started the season 5-7. They had some frustrating losses to kind of teams that you wouldn't expect them to lose to. But they've now rattled off 6 straight. And like you noted, Ryan Howard looks like she is a completely different player. It looked for a second there like maybe she was going to be in that sophomore slump. She's broken out of that. Maybe it was the all-star snub that needed to be, whatever it was, it's working. And I think to the bigger point here, and part of why I'm going to be heavily on the Dream, you pinned really well. The Lynx, they've been streaky, and they, a second ago they were 9-9. They were above the Dream in the standings. They were looking great. But it was, if you dug deeper, it was a lot of fool's gold. So I'm going to rattle off their wins here from that stretch. So they started 1-7. Then they beat the Sparks twice, who were shorthanded in both games. In fact, they beat the Sparks 3 times. And the Sparks in that stretch were not their full selves. They beat the Storm twice. We know the Storm are arguably the worst team in the league right now. They beat the Mercury once, who are at the bottom of the standings. They beat the Mercury again. And then they beat the Fever, who are probably the best of that bunch, but are not a playoff team. And they've been struggling to get over the finish line to actually finish games. So there's not a single impressive win on the Lynx resume from that stretch. They did beat the Mystics earlier in the season, ironically, for their first win. That's probably their most impressive. But they really, this Lynx team, and it makes sense with the coach like Cheryl Reeve. They're a team that can kind of take care of the other bottom feeders in the league, and they'll probably be there right around that 8th seed when it comes to the end of the season in terms of making the playoffs. But in terms of this matchup, the Dream are just a much better team. The Dream have beaten solid teams. They've taken care of business against bad teams. And they're just playing a lot better right now. This is a team that I think before the season I had pegged as one of my favorites to go over the win total, to really surprise some folks. And at the start of the season, it didn't look to be the case at all. And it wasn't ideal. But in the last couple of weeks, they really have turned it around. Now, there's sometimes can be some, momentum thrown off with a break at the All-Star. But I don't see this team really, losing it to the amount that they have to worry about this Lynx team today. That's why I'm going to play them. I'd play them up to 6.5, even though I have the spread a little bit higher. I want to, have that edge there. So I think if you see this Dream minus 6.5, that's still good to go.
Still good to go. I think you are correct about that all-star snub, by the way. It's back-to-back seasons now that we've had all-star snubs fuel like all-time runs. So last year, Chelsea Gray was snubbed, and then, she goes on to have an insane postseason run with a finals MVP to top it all off. And Ryan Howard seems like she is on that similar trajectory. But to your point, I think the Dream have shown that they can beat good teams, and the Lynx have only shown that they can beat the mediocre teams and take care of business when they are the better team. So, all right, we are riding with the Dream, I should say, on Tuesday. And the later game is at 10 Eastern on CBS Sports Network. We have the Sun favored by 5 at the Phoenix Mercury. And you talked about it. The Mercury are not a good team. So this is, would you say this is surprising to you?
Yeah. So if you're on WNBA Twitter whatsoever, that kind of a running joke is the disrespect with the CT at the end, because the Connecticut Sun always are saying that they are disrespected. To be honest, this line is the embodiment of actual disrespect, because this line should be twice as high, if not even higher. This opened up at, I believe, they opened at 4.5 or 4. It already moved a little bit. And it should be, I think it's going to keep moving more. Hopefully by the time you hear this, it's still going to be actionable, because honestly, there's a lot of leeway. So I think it will be. I make this number Sun minus 12. So I really have it as a big edge for the Sun. They did lose Bree Jones, but it seems like the books keep thinking that's going to matter more than it does. It did seem to hurt them in their losses against the Aces and the Liberty. Those are the two teams where you really need to have that star level ability. But the Sun are as good at next person up as anyone in the league, and they really have not missed a step with Bree Jones out of the lineup against every other team that's not in that upper echelon. Those are their only 2 losses since Bree Jones went out. Alyssa Thomas is playing like an MVP since Jones went out. I still like her points prop over. Honestly, this game is a little bit scary about the blowout potential. So actually, I don't know if I'll be looking at the points exactly. I'll have to see where they open that up. But she certainly is, if we could get points per minute and somehow bet that, she's going to be doing well in the first half there. Some of the other books will offer you to bet first half specifically. I think Alyssa Thomas is going to come out and have an excellent first half. I'll probably be looking at the Sun first half. If this line does get up to somehow minus 10.5, 11 by the time you're listening to this, you still might be able to find an edge if the first half line isn't too inflated. Because the Sun have been excellent in the first half this season. The Mercury have not. I think this is about as mispriced an opening line as we've seen in a little while. We got a bunch of those at the beginning of the season, and then they disappeared. So it's nice to see one of these again, where at least personally, I have this made as much different than the book. So I'm going to be all over the Sun with a lot of leeway there. So hopefully folks can catch that number when it's still actionable.
Okay, so going with Sun minus 5, you mentioned if that number gets up to more like 11.5, 12, you would still most likely attack the Sun in the first half. Is there a number in your mind for the full game that is would be the highest for you?
Yeah, I would. If it got to 10.5, I would still play 10.5. I'm not going to go past that. Yeah, there's a lot of leeway on this one.
Yeah.
Maybe maybe the Mercury use the break to really align things, but I don't see that happening. And the Sun have looked so good against the bottom tier of the league.
They have, you're right. And to your point, most recently their losses were really just to the Aces and the Liberty. And that brings me to one more follow-up here. As far as the disrespect with the capital CT is concerned, I did want to just touch on some futures, because the Sun are at plus 2,600 on FanDuel to win the championship. I know it's the Aces have been so dominant that it's almost disrespectful to them to pick anyone else to win. But I mean, is this worth a flyer?
Like you said, I mean, it's what we're doing here is giving them any chance whatsoever. Plus 2,600 is basically, less than 4% implied odds.
Right.
We're giving them a very, very small chance. And what I think the look is here is you can bet them, and then I think there's a decent chance that they end up in the final. I think that the market is mispricing the Liberty over them. I think that's maybe the gap that's even more off in the market. I do think the Aces should be runaway favorites right now. We've seen nothing to show us otherwise. But I think the gap between the Liberty and the Sun maybe isn't to the extreme that the books are accounting for. So if you're looking for an overall championship bet, I think probably the Sun are the way to go. Of the teams, there's only a few teams you can bet right now, to be honest. There's just it's not reasonable for other teams to win the title. But if the Sun match up with the Liberty in that 2-3, they potentially could get home court. They're about neck and neck for overall record right now. The Liberty have beaten them the times they've played, so they're going to have that tiebreaker. But I think the market is slightly overinflating Liberty right now in comparison to the Sun, especially in terms of if you have a Sun plus 2,600 and they get to the finals, you're not going to want to bet the Aces minus 400 or something for the series if they're against the Sun. But if you have a great ticket on the Sun, you might put a little bit there so you guarantee yourself some profit. So in terms of looking at an overall, to win the championship, I think that's probably the way I'd lean. There are a few other futures markets out there right now. A couple of weeks back, I wrote up a win totals piece for Action that was high on the Wings. I still am a little bit high on the Wings. That number has actually moved up a few. So at the time, we were able to get them 18.5 if you tailed that. Now seeing at the All-Star break, they've already moved the number up to 21.5. But this Wings team really looks solid right now. I think that's going to be a team that I look to play come the postseason in general. I don't think they're going to be able to take out the Aces, but I think they're a team that could win their first round series and then give the Aces a little trouble and maybe steal a game off them. We saw them defeat them early in the year. They do have some of the size to be able to do that. And with Tara McCowan back, that four-person lineup with McCowan, Sabali, Arike, and I'm blanking on the fourth person in the Wings lineup right now, but their key four-person lineup has been outstanding. It's like almost comparable to the Aces level in terms of their net rating right now. And it's just been really impressive to see. So I'll be keeping tabs on them as the season goes along as well, because that's a team that I think has a lot of potential right now.
Yeah, I'm looking. Oh, Natasha Howard, did you say?
Of course, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
there you
No,
go.
Natasha Howard was who I forgot.
I'm like trying to run through the names in my mind, but yeah, that's a really good point. Obviously, we saw the Wings are capable of beating the Aces, and they're certainly a team that can get hot, right? I think I wouldn't be surprised if we saw that. And then I thought you made a great point about, I think that the Sun and the Liberty are closer than the books are. The books are still having like the Aces and Liberty, I think, closer than they should be. It really is like the Aces and like a big gap right now. And then, Liberty and then Sun. And it's crazy to me that, we talked about the Sun at plus 2,600, the Liberty haven't shown much against the Aces yet, and they're at plus 280. That it's a massive gap. I mean, I know they're factoring in probably some improved chemistry down the road in the season. And then, as far as the MVP race, just because you mentioned Alyssa Thomas earlier, she's at plus 1,900 now. And, we saw this with the All-Star voting when, everyone was kind of crying after it came out that she wasn't a starter. And I think that's absolutely fair. She absolutely should have been a starter. She was still a reserve, but I think it goes to that greater narrative about like, I don't know if it's the Connecticut market, which is odd because, obviously basketball is huge in Connecticut, but yeah, I just don't know if she would ever get the respect over a Stewie or Asia Wilson. Stewie is the odds-on favorite right now for MVP. Asia's at plus 320, so not a bad deal. And then just really quick, I just thought this was crazy because again, on this Aces roster, it's like anybody can really kind of put themselves into that conversation. I think throughout the season so far, Jackie Young Up until recently, Jackie Young was the player on the Aces that was getting a lot of hype, right? Just has improved in so many facets, improved her 3-point shooting. She's at plus 11,000, which is nuts to me. Kelsey Plum at plus 7,500. So, but this is just showing. I mean, I guess based on the narrative, once again, I just don't know if anyone else on that team besides Asia Wilson would get the MVP.
Yeah, there was a moment there where it looked like Jackie Young might have a chance. She started the season so well. There was definitely some regression coming, and she's seen some of that regression.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe why her number is so long right now. But to your point, the Aces do have the ability for any player on any night to be the one carrying them. So I think that's another market where it's maybe more extreme in the odds jumps than is actually in actuality. But I also know that these MVP narratives kind of coalesce around certain players. And that's why you do see such big favorites versus such long shots, because it is something that is more subjective. And because it's subjective, you can kind of you can see the writing on the wall sometimes a little bit first. So I think it's pretty fair that there are two key favorites. I do think Alyssa Thomas at plus 1,900 does have a little bit of value. I think it's unlikely that she wins. But, an injury here, a couple more triple doubles there. I think there is a little bit of value.
How many triple doubles does Alyssa Thomas need to have in order to potentially surpass one of these other players in the MVP conversation?
Yeah. So for instance, say Asia goes down to an injury. We'd never want that. But say Asia goes down to injury and the Sun finish above the Liberty in the standings. Suddenly that's a pretty interesting conversation. And that's neither of those are all that unlikely, when we're talking about plus 1,900 or around 5% implied, that to me, there is a little bit of value there. I wouldn't go crazy on it, but I think there's a bit of value.
Well, and also just the sheer fact that there's only, two other players that are sort of ahead of her in that narrative race. So, just from that alone, it's certainly intriguing. I'm glad we got to check in on that a little bit, since we are kind of at the midway point in the season and we've had a few days here off to sort of digest what we've seen so far at the All-Star break. But once again, for the Tuesday slate, Jim likes the Dream -4.5 and the Sun -5. And Jim, as always, it's a pleasure having you here on the pod.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Look forward to it. Until next time.
Yes. A reminder to follow Jim at Turvy Bets on Twitter, but more importantly, the Action app. If you don't have it already, you will want to download that. It's such an easy way to not only keep track of what we're betting, but keep track of your own bets. You can also rate and review this podcast if you would, and win some Action swag or a free subscription to Action Pro. Once again, this has been Buckets. Thank you so much for listening. We are presented by FanDuel. Let's get buckets.